This story starts during World War II, with a total of 16 million Americans in the armed forces. To combat an estimated 15 million veterans unemployed after the war, Congress passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, also known as the GI Bill. Signed into law on June 22, 1944, it provided veterans pathways to civilian careers. Over the next 10 years, 7.8 million trained under the bill, including 450,000 engineers, 711,000 mechanics, and 288,000 metalworkers. Veterans entered manufacturing, in particular the automobile industry, very quickly. By July, they accounted for 27% of all employees in the auto industry. As the workforce grew, business boomed. In 1950, General Motors sold 3.8 million cars and trucks, over a million more than the previous record year in 1949. Total sales were 7,531 million. A quarter of gross sales went to steadily increasing employee salaries, helping strengthen the American middle class. Improved availability of materials and expanded facilities also had a role in the success. By 1965, 21% of all steel, 49% of lead, 61% of rubber, 32% of zinc, 13% of aluminum, and 58% of all upholstery leather produced in the country, as well as 1 in 6 businesses and 1 in 7 workers were tied to the auto industry. Car ownership became an iconic symbol of American prosperity and the American dream. Sounds amazing. So what could go wrong? In September of 1961, Miss Rose Pierneri lost her arm in a terrible car accident in her 1961 sporty Corvair. In the words of eyewitness patrol officer Jim Bertolozzo, all of a sudden the vehicle made a sharp cut to the left and swerved over while driving at 35 miles per hour. These accidents kept happening. By 1965, over 100 lawsuits had been filed alleging instability in the 1960 through 1965 Corvair models. These weren't accidents, but the result of General Motors setting unrealistic expectations for the car and cutting corners to save costs. The maximum permissible load capacity of the size tire used on the Corvair was 835 pounds per tire at 24 psi, meaning at 2 or more passengers the car was overloaded. The Corvair was intended for 6 passengers. Additionally, on the 1961 model, GM moved the spare tire to the back. This created more space in the front trunk, but further unbalanced the car, strained the already overloaded rear tires, and exposed the spare tire to dangerous heat from the engine. Finally, the outer rim was likely to scrape the roadway, causing a flip. GM was aware of the risk. On May 18, 1956, the Chevrolet Division Head of Research and Development stated that the ordinary swing axle, under severe lateral forces produced by cornering, tends to lift the rear end of the vehicle such that it tends to roll over. In 1965, stockholder Seymour Charles pleaded to recall the 1960 through 1963 models to install stabilizing components. GM chose financial gain. This would have cost $25 million, or equivalent to less than 5 days' profit. The Corvair was not unique. The 3 big auto giants, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, knowingly sold many unsafe models in the 50s and 60s. They were able to avoid government regulation for several reasons. The auto industry constituted a large share of the economy and paid a lot of taxes, so legislators were afraid to touch them. It also controlled large organizations such as the Society of Automotive Engineers and the Automobile Manufacturers Association, who published standards often used as the basis for legislation. For example, brake fluid laws in 25 states were explicitly based on SAE standards, and an SAE paper that claimed modern automobiles were safe and seatbelts were unnecessary was used in House subcommittee hearings. In 1964, when the General Services Administration was finally authorized to establish safety standards for federal vehicles, the AMA immediately invited GSA officials to a 3-day tour of company facilities. Soon after, the GSA held a conference with many industry figures present. The final standards published on June 30, 1965 were much weaker than the original GSA propositions. For example, requirements for decelerative force on the head upon impact were reduced such that out of 16 1953 through 1956 models previously declared, quote, exceedingly unsafe by the Federal Aviation Agency, 9 met standards. In 1965, investigative journalist Ralph Nader published an explosive expose titled Unsafe at Any Speed, exposing the auto industry's systematic negligence of safety. It uncovered years of corruption and intentional cover-ups, calling the government to regulate big auto. The book proposed that new policies must end industry secrecy, break ties between corporate interests and government agencies, and commit more money to safety research. Despite industry backlash, Unsafe at Any Speed sparked a reaction of widespread cultural criticism of the auto industry and big business at large, leading to government reforms that protect consumers to this day.
The reaction to the book was immediate. Corvair sales plummeted by 93%, and due to safety issues, the car was recalled. As a result, General Motors launched a smear campaign against Nader, luring him into compromising situations, spreading rumors, sending threats, and hiring detectives to follow Nader and interrogate his relatives.
came up and said, we're having a discussion on foreign affairs. Would you like to join us? Well, this is rather strange. It's not like...
The harassment was publicized and the reaction was outrage. In March 1966, during a Senate subcommittee on executive reorganization, under pressure from angry Senators Robert F. Kennedy and Abraham Ribicoff, James Rush, GM CEO, apologized to Nader due to Nader's harassment coming to light.
I apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader. I sincerely hope that these apologies will be accepted.
Afterwards, Nader filed an invasion of privacy case against GM and settled for $425,000, launching Nader to stardom and tarnishing GM's image. Many students reacted to Nader's message by joining his student organization, Nader's Raiders. They organized as teams and wrote reports to expose negligence in various industries. Founded in 1968, they numbered 200 by 1971, with most working part-time for little salary and for long hours.
It has shown students who say that it's impossible to change things through the system, that in fact it is possible.
The impact was tangible. Their first report was on the Federal Trade Commission, revealing the organization's inability to regulate business. The government reacted by nearly abolishing the agency. More reports followed. Chemical Peace exposed the FDA's lack of regulation of harmful chemicals in Americans' food and the organization's close ties to big drug companies. Vanishing Air uncovered the nation's air quality crisis, accelerating the new environmentalist movement. Although numerous Nader reports were released, they were all well-researched and were never scrutinized or proven false. The public grew more skeptical of big business and government agencies as a reaction to the increased awareness of these shady practices. The consumer movement of the 60s and 70s took off, leading to many new regulations. Simultaneously, the anti-authority hippie movement took shape as well.
These cultural reactions led to reform legislation. The Wholesome Meat Act placed stringent regulations on the inspection and sale of meat. The Wholesome Poultry Products Act mandated inspection of all poultry products produced in the United States by the federal government. The Natural Gas Pipeline Act allowed the Department of Transportation to mandate standards to ensure safe and reliable transport of gas. Lastly, the Radiation Control for Health and Safety Act gave the FDA power to set federal standards and conduct research on radiation. The auto industry was not spared from reform. In September of 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed two hallmark bills, the Motor Vehicle Highway Safety Act and the Highway Safety Act. The Motor Vehicle Highway Safety Act led to strict safety standards for automobile design enforced by the National Highway Safety Administration. The Highway Safety Act allocated more responsibility of highway safety to the government and created both the National Traffic Safety Administration and the National Highway Safety Agency. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Transportation was created the same year. Though Nader always considered himself to be a full-time citizen and avoided taking office till much later, many of his associates went on to lead government agencies under the Carter administration. Most notably, Joan Claybrook played a vital role in passing legislation with the Mandatory Airbag Act, as well as the introduction of crash test dummies that drastically improved the safety of cars as head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Although Nader had a great deal of success bringing auto reform, there's more work to be done. When crash test dummies were first introduced, only male ones were implemented. These skewed results and safety features were only designed to protect men. In 2003, the NHTSA first implemented the first female crash test dummies. They were completely inadequate. Simply scaled down versions of male crash test dummies, they didn't take into account the anatomical differences between men and women. Female drivers' outcomes still remain poor. As of 2015, they were 17% more likely to die in a car accident and 73% more likely to be injured compared to a male driver. Today, researchers like Becky Muller and Astrid Linder are advocating for the creation of better and more accurate female dummies. The government has also made efforts to protect consumers outside of the auto field, in a recent example being the No Immunity for Glyphosate Act. When President Trump tried to implement an executive order protecting Monsanto, who sold glyphosate-based weed killers which had been linked to cancer, Representatives Thomas Macy and Shelley Pingree responded by pushing the No Immunity for Glyphosate Act, which would stop the executive order and would allow people to press charges against these companies for any harm that comes to them. The auto industry experienced incredible growth in the post-war era, but it came at a cost. Cheaply produced and poorly regulated vehicles were unsafe and led to many deaths and injuries. The publication of Unsafe at Any Speed in 1965 not only exposed the industry's blatant negligence, but started a nationwide crusade against big business and a broader reform movement. Nader overcame industry retaliation to reshape cultural views on consumer protection and make it a government priority.